After going through such a trying, difficult, frustrating, and tumultuous 2021-2022 season that ended in a first-round exit against the eventual Eastern Conference champion Boston Celtics, the Brooklyn Nets head into this offseason with a couple of questions right now among their roster. What positions do you think that they're going to have to go out there and try to fill? What are the positions of need? And who are the players that they're looking to target in free agency and through the trade wire going into this 2022-2023 offseason to get them ready for a potential championship-type run in the next season in 2022-2023? What's going on, guys? This is NYG Jeffy T 3285, and I'm here to let you guys know on what Brooklyn Nets players I believe that they're going to target in free agency and the trade wire this offseason to help improve this roster and help them get back to a championship type level that they were expected to be in the past few years. Now, we all know the difficulty that the Brooklyn Nets went through this past season. COVID, injuries, underperforming players. It was a very, very big miss in terms of the expectations of the Brooklyn Nets, and they unfortunately had a very, very disappointing end to their season when they got swept by the eventual Eastern Conference champion Boston Celtics 4-0 in the first round of the playoffs after the Nets survived the play-in game before. Some of the problems with the Brooklyn Nets is they lacked a consistent outside shooter from the three-point line. They had no interior defense. The rebounding was very shoddy, and that's what got them exposed in terms of trying to go up against some of these bigger teams in the East, some of these teams with more depth. And you know you had Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, but both of them struggled during the first round of the playoffs, and they really didn't have much help on the outside. So here are the list of the Brooklyn Nets that are going to be potential free agents going into this offseason. In terms of the unrestricted free agents, you have Bruce Brown, who actually was their best player overall, I believe, in that first round, LaMarcus Aldridge, Blake Griffin, Goran Dragic, as well as Andre Drummond. And going into this offseason, your restricted free agents, you have David Duke Jr., who's also going to be playing on a two-way contract if you bring him back, as well as Nick Claxton, the young power forward / center who got a lot more playing time during the playoffs than he did towards the end of the regular season. Now, out of all these guys, who I would think the Nets might think about bringing back, just to provide some veteran leadership as well as some interior presence in the front court, I would not be surprised if they try to bring back Bruce Brown, because the one thing that he did bring to that team was energy. He brought some defensive prowess to that team, and he even provided at times some pretty solid scoring, as he averaged close to about 17 points per game, 18 points per game during the first round of the playoffs this year. And Bruce Brown has shown the ability to be a guy that can make the tip-ins at the end. He can play good defense against one of your top players on the opposite team, except you just don't want to rely on him as being one of your primary scorers out there, which unfortunately the Nets had to do with the injury to Joe Harris earlier in the season, and Patty Mills just struggled a lot in terms of his shot from the three-point line throughout most of the season. And Patty Mills is another guy who I made a video earlier on that Patty Mills is going into his player option that's going to have to be decided on June 29th of this month. So the Nets then are they going to think about picking it up, or is Patty Mills going to be walking at the end of free agency and the Nets will look to upgrade? Now, in terms of who I'd like to see them bring back, I wouldn't mind to see them bring back a guy like Andre Drummond, because yes, he struggled with his free throw percentage. He was a very, very big problem at the free throw line. But at the same time, he did provide some energy and he did provide some shot blocking ability at the center position. Do I think the Nets are going to bring him back? I'd probably say it's about maybe around a 50-55% chance that Andre Drummond could be back. He has said he would like to be back, but it has to determine around the contract matters with this. In terms of Blake Griffin was a guy that showed a lot of energy, showed a lot of prowess, showed a lot of defensive intangibles, even hit some three-point shots in the 2020-2021 season. But last year, he really did not do much. He's mostly just sitting on the bench as a cheerleader. Didn't really play that much. But in the playoffs, he did contribute a little bit, brought a little bit of energy to that team. But it just was not enough. And it seems like Blake Griffin, who was one of the best young players, best rim protectors, best guys that can go in and get the dunks at the beginning of his career. Seems like he's lost a lot of his edge. And it doesn't seem like that it would be a smart move to bring this guy back unless you just want to bring him back for your leadership purposes and a guy that could maybe come off the bench and bring some energy to that front court. LaMarcus Aldridge, one of the best players in the past 10, 15 years in terms of the power forward position. He just unfortunately didn't show it last year. A guy that was mainly sitting on the bench in the playoffs, didn't play at all. He dealt with a lot of health issues going into last year when the Nets signed him. Didn't play for the rest of the season. Nets brought him back when he unretired and wanted to come back and try to give it another go. But LaMarcus Aldridge really just did not play, and it's clear that he just doesn't have the same skills that he once did when he was in his Portland days. Goran Dragic, older player, didn't play the entire first half of the season. Nets decided to pick him up on a waiver claim after the Miami Heat waived him. I'm sorry, not the Miami. The Houston Rockets waived him, and the Brooklyn Nets decided to pick him up, bring him onto his roster, played sparingly well at times, gave them energy, hit some key three-point shots, even drove to the basket at times, but is a big-time liability on defense. An older player, do you want to think about maybe bringing him back as a 6th, 7th guy, maybe a backup point guard off the bench? I don't know. I could say it's maybe like a 45% chance they bring back Goran Dragic. And in terms of the restricted free agents, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't bring back David Duke Jr. I mean, the kid is a guy you can just throw on the G Leagues, try to develop him a little bit more. You play him on a 2-way contract, see if you can get anything out of him, and then maybe he could be a guy that you could try to develop and bring him back to the roster either later that season and see what he can bring to your roster in terms of the tangibles. And in terms of Nicholas Claxton, I like Nick Claxton. I think he's a very, very good young big man if you give him the chance. Do I think he's going to be brought back? I don't know. His free throw percentage was very iffy. That's a big problem. The Nets couldn't keep him on the floor because he was just such a liability on the free throw line. And in terms of he's a very, very limited right now in terms of his offensive game. He's a great shot block and rim protector. He can get you some rebounds. So he's very good, solid on the defensive end of the game. But his offensive game is just very, very shaky. So I don't know if the Brooklyn Nets are going to bring him back at all. Now, in terms of going into this offseason, what players I think the Brooklyn Nets could target. Now, I'm just going to go over the numbers right now of the amount of active contracts on the Nets, their dead cap, the estimated luxury tax they're going to have to pay this year, and the salary that's going to be on the books right now for the 2022-2023 season. Now, in terms of the active contracts right now on this book, that includes the guys that are going to be right now contracted before free agency starts. Either the guys that are right now on contract for this 2022-2023 season. And they have right now $157,843,675 million in terms of active contracts on the books right now for the Brooklyn Nets. In terms of dead cap money, they have $11,433,379 million in dead cap. That includes when they have waived Javante Carter this past offseason when they signed him to about a $3 million deal. They waived him into the middle of the season. He went on to sign with the Bucks. That also includes James Johnson, who they also waived during the middle of the season when they signed him. Now, in terms of the total salary cap wage that's going to be going into this season, they have $172,820,410 in terms of salary cap wage for this team going into the 2022-2023 season. The estimated luxury tax, and this is where it's not pretty, and you can understand when you have a couple of the biggest salary cap guys on this roster, $97,931,568 salary cap, the estimated luxury tax that the Brooklyn Nets and Joe Tsai is going to have to pay for this team going into that he had to pay in the 2021-2022 season and what he might have to pay including into the 2022-2023 season. That's not including any additions that they add to this team in the offseason. And in terms of the estimated salary on the books for the 2022-2023 season, right now it's estimated to be $186,447,119 of the estimated salary that's going to be on the books for the Brooklyn Nets going into the 2022-2023 season. Now I'm going to go into the 5 players I could see the Brooklyn Nets target in this coming offseason of guys that can maybe help this team and won't cost too much in terms of trade value or in terms of free agent money that you're going to have to throw out there to bring these guys in. Now, one guy that I'd like to see the Nets maybe bring in is a guy like Gary Harris. Gary Harris has been in the league for about 8-9 years. And in terms of his numbers last year with the Orlando Magic, he had 11.1 points per game while he played in about 28 minutes per game. He had a 43% field goal percentage. He had an 87 free throw percentage. Rebounds per game, he had about 2 rebounds per game. He had about 2 assists per game. Steals per game, he had 1. And blocks per game, he had about 0.5. So you're not expecting a lot in terms of the blocks and the steals per game. But he is a guy that you could bring in and could be a guy that can maybe score off the bench, which the Nets have badly needed because right now, in terms of their bench scoring, it was very rough at times watching this team try to get some points off the bench. I mean, it was difficult at times. Patty Mills was probably the most consistent guy off the bench, and even he struggled a lot throughout the season as he was forced in to play a lot of starter minutes when you had to lose guys like Kyrie Irving, when James Harden was part of the team, Kevin Durant when he was out with injury, Joe Harris who missed the rest of the season, Bruce Brown missed some time, so you had to put Patty Mills in the starting lineup when he was mainly supposed to be a six-man guy. So I'd like to maybe see the Nets, if it won't cost too much, maybe bring in a guy like Gary Harris who can provide some veteran leadership and as well as some scoring off the bench. Another guy that I could see brought in is a guy like Chris Boucher, who is a guy that came in when Pascal Siakam missed a lot of time for the Toronto Raptors, and he actually did a pretty solid job for the Toronto Raptors in terms of some front court presence to that team. Chris Boucher played in 80 games. He averaged 21 minutes per game with a point per game average of 9.4, so about 9 points per game. He had a field goal percentage of about 46, free throw percentage of about 77, 1 block per game, a steal per game, about 1 assist per game, and he had about 6 rebounds per game. So the rebounds at least come off as something that you might want to add to this team in terms of a front court presence. He's not too old. He's a guy that you can bring into this team. And if he's not a starter, I don't think he's going to be brought in for starters minutes. But he's a guy that you could bring in and give this team something that they have not had in a while. And that's somebody that can protect the rim, get some rebounds per game, so allow the offense to not be able to dictate the boards in the game. And even a guy that could provide some offensive rebounding per game. That's the one thing that this Nets team has needed is rebounds per game. They need somebody that can go in and grab the rebound when it's needed. So a guy like Chris Boucher can be able to come in and do that for this Brooklyn Nets team as a guy that can come off the bench and provide some shot blocking and provide some rim protecting as well as some rebounds and maybe occasionally get you some inside scoring in terms of tip balls and maybe some layups and also some dunks in the middle of the rim. Another guy I wouldn't mind seeing the Nets bring in is the 3-and-D guy from the Los Angeles Clippers, and that's Robert Covington. He's always been known as a guy that will be able to hit you those 3-point shots, and he can also provide you some good, solid defense on the front court in terms of the small forward position, and you could throw him on one of the best offensive players on the opposite team and let him just lock one of those guys down. Now, in terms of his numbers in the 2021-2022 season, Robert Covington averaged about 9 points per game. He played in 71 games total. He averaged 1 block, as well as one steal, 1 assist per game. He had 5 rebounds per game. He had a free throw percentage of about 84%, and he had a field goal percentage of about 50%, which that is pretty solid for a guy that you know is going to be able to hit the 3-point shot consistently, a guy that you could even start potentially at the small forward position, or you could bring in as a guy off the bench that could provide you some 3-point shots off the bench, which the Nets have needed, like I mentioned before, when I talked about Gary Harris. Another guy that you could bring in, come off the bench, provide you for some scoring off the bench, 3-point shooting, and lockdown defense. And also a guy that can go up there and provide and get some rebounding that the Nets have needed. Like I mentioned with Chris Boucher, Robert Covington is another guy that can provide and knock off some boards and be able to get some rebounds for this team that they badly have needed. Another guy who he's not really going to jump off the boards in terms of his numbers, but this guy's going to bring to you the type of thing that this Nets team is also needing, and that's toughness. Toughness, anger, even that, ability to ruffle some feathers on the other team. That's one thing that this Nets team needs badly. Is somebody that's going to go in there and just ruffle the feathers of the opposing team. And that's Markieff Morris. Markieff Morris is a guy who played with the Miami Heat last year. Didn't get a lot of minutes, didn't get a lot of games played, but this guy will go in there and he will bring some nastiness to your team that this team needs. Markieff Morris, in his 2021-2022 numbers, he averaged 17 games. He had about 8 points per game, with about 18 minutes per game, with 3 rebounds per game, about 1 assist, a 47% field goal percentage, 1 steal, 1 block, and a free throw percentage of about 71%. Markieff Morris is never going to be a guy that's going to go in there and he's going to pop off with his numbers. But what he's going to do is he's going to go in there and he's going to punish you. He's going to go in there. He's going to play a physical brand of basketball. He's going to aggravate you. He's going to agitate you. He's going to make you create offensive fouls on him. He's going to make you even get upset, and he can even draw a technical foul against you. That's what Markieff Morris is getting. Much like his twin brother, Marcus Morris. Markieff Morris is going to be a guy that you can bring in, not play too many minutes, and he's going to provide that nastiness, that toughness, that type of swagger that you need for this Brooklyn Nets team that they have been missing sorely. Because right now the Nets are not exactly a very tough team in terms of the interior of their front court. And a guy like Markieff Morris could be brought in there and he could bring some toughness to this team that they have badly sorely needed. And the last guy that I wouldn't even mind seeing the Brooklyn Nets bring in, and this is a guy that I've liked as a player for a while, but unfortunately has suffered some devastating injuries the past couple of years. But this past playoffs where he showcased some of those abilities, that he could be a guy that maybe he's starting to get his abilities back, and he was a perennial all-star player, guy that was an all-star the past couple of years before he got hurt. And that's Victor Oladipo. And if he's not going to cost too much, if the Miami Heat do not bring back a guy like Victor Oladipo, I would not mind the Brooklyn Nets bringing this guy in, and he could be your instant sixth man off the bench. Victor Oladipo, last year, he did not play in a lot of games. He played in 8 games last year. But when he played, he provided about 12 points per game. He had a field goal percentage of about 47%, so about 22 minutes per game. He had about 3 rebounds per game, 4 assists, 1 steal, and about a little under a block per game. But this guy is somebody that's going to bring instant offense to your second unit. And what the Brooklyn Nets have been lacking so seriously, and I mentioned it with Gary Harris and Robert Covington, but it especially goes for a guy like Victor Oladipo. He will bring instant offense to this team for the second unit. So if you need to rest Kevin Durant for a little bit, if you need to rest Kyrie Irving for a little bit, even Ben Simmons when he comes back, you have a guy like Victor Oladipo that you could bring in, and he will be able to provide that scoring punch off the bench that the Brooklyn Nets have badly needed. And if he's somewhat or close to all the way back, and he's anywhere near the all-star form that he was when he was healthy and playing well for the Indiana Pacers, Victor Oladipo is a guy that can instantly add some offense to this team, and he could provide something that the Brooklyn Nets have badly needed for a long time, and that's bench scoring. And if you could bring in a guy like Victor Oladipo, he won't cost you too much. The Brooklyn Nets have to do everything they can to sign him, and maybe you convince him to maybe take like some type of pay cut, or maybe like on the veteran minimum, be like, you have a chance to come in here and win a championship with this team, and all we need you to do is come into the second unit and just provide that scoring when we need to, get some rest for guys like Joe Harris, guys like Kyrie Irving, Ben Simmons, if Bruce Brown's back, Kevin Durant, and just do that for the team. So I would love to see a guy like Victor Oladipo, if he's not going to cost too much, be brought into this Brooklyn Nets team, because I think he's going to provide a whole lot for this Brooklyn Nets team for the second unit. So those are 5 guys that I would not mind the new Brooklyn Nets targeting in free agency as well as through trade to bring into this team and provide some either toughness, rebounding, front court presence, shot blocking, or scoring off the bench to help give alleviation to the top guys on this roster like Ben Simmons, who the Nets are expecting to come back and be a force on this team in terms of the defensive and rebounding prowess, and as well as passing. And of course, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, who the Brooklyn Nets are going to be keying a lot on what this team is going to be, the direction this team is going to go in the 2022-2023 season. So that's just my little overview of what I would like to see the Brooklyn Nets do this offseason. The players who are going to be free agents, unrestricted and restricted, who I'd like to see the Brooklyn Nets maybe bring back to this team, as well as some players that the Brooklyn Nets should target in free agency and through the draft. At the free agency and through the trade market. I would like to see this Brooklyn Nets team just try to find guys that fit their system. That's what I'd like to see. Guys that will come in and fit their system, fit the culture, and just go with their roles with this team. You don't need guys that are going to go out there and be able to just, light up. You don't need another superstar. You figure Kyrie Irving, if he's brought back, because he's got a player option himself, he'll be a free agent if they don't pick it up, and it doesn't look like it will. But signs are pointing that the Brooklyn Nets and Kyrie Irving will come to a long-term deal. And he'll be with the Brooklyn Nets for long-term along with Kevin Durant and Ben Simmons. So you got Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and hopefully a Ben Simmons that's healthy and motivated out there as your top 3 players. After that, you just need guys that are going to be able to come in and provide some depth, which they badly need because they didn't have any depth on this team in the 2021-2022 season. That's one thing that hurt them when they had some injuries. Just some depth, some guys that can provide scoring off the bench, rim protection, shot blocking, rebounding per game, and of course one of the most important things this Brooklyn Nets team has needed for a while, and that's toughness, nastiness, and some spirit to be brought to this team, and of course some leadership. Brooklyn Nets need some leadership big time, and a lot of toughness added to this roster that feels way too finesse right now. And if they want a chance to maybe compete for a championship this next season, the Brooklyn Nets have got to add a lot of these intangibles to this team. And they have to make sure they stay healthy as well. So that's just my video for today. If you like the video, please hit the like button below. Turn on the bell for the notifications for the next video or short that's going to come out. Leave a comment below on some of the players that you would like to see the Brooklyn Nets bring onto this roster for the 2022-2023 NBA season. And also share as well, what players you'd like to see the Nets bring back in terms of their unrestricted and restricted free agents. And how you think and what's your expectations for this team going into the 2022-2023 NBA season. So I hope everybody enjoys their Saturday. Have a great Father's Day. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take it easy. And let's go Brooklyn Nets. NetsWorld, baby. Let's go.